It has been said that our past is only a little less uncertain than our future. No event illustrates this more than the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which occurred 60 years ago today in Dallas, Texas. Particular criticism and questions have been directed at the official government document regarding this event, known popularly as the Warren Commission Report, which was issued in September of 1964. My guest today is Gerald Posner, whose 1993 book, Case Closed, remains the definitive defense of the Warren Commission's basic conclusions that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman, that there was no connection between Oswald and Jack Ruby, and that there was no larger conspiracy. I look forward to a lively and challenging discussion with him, in particular about things that we now know, many of which were not known at the time that Mr. Posner's book was published. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, welcome to Timeless. It is November 22nd, 2023, the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. That is really difficult to believe that much time has passed and that there are still many Americans alive today who remember that afternoon. I just want to tell you a quick little story to illustrate how invested I am in this event. Actually, when I was 17 years old, for my joint birthday and Christmas present, my birthday is in October, as some of you may know, and Christmas is obviously in December, my mother decided to take me to Dallas, Texas for 24 hours to see the JFK assassination site. We went to Love Field, which is the airport where they landed and where LBJ was actually sworn in on Air Force One after JFK was assassinated. We went in a car and we traced the motorcade route that the president went on. We obviously went to Dealey Plaza and the 6th floor museum. We went to Parkland Hospital. We went to the corner where Officer Tippit was shot, the boarding house where Lee Harvey Oswald stayed, the Texas Theater to which Lee Harvey Oswald fled. This is just to say that I have been so interested in this topic literally for years, from the time that I was in high school. And so this is an especially powerful and momentous day for me, as I know it is for many Americans, given how much speculation surrounds that afternoon and how much that day changed the course of American history. I'm always excited to dive into history subjects on this show, but I'm especially looking forward to today's episode and speaking with Gerald Posner, whose book I really appreciated. It is extraordinarily well-researched and detailed. Mr. Posner is a journalist and author of 12 books, including Case Closed, of course, the subject of today, which was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. Mr. Posner also wrote God's Bankers, which is a 200-year history of the finances of the Vatican, as well as a biography of Dr. Joseph Mengele, the SS physician at Auschwitz known as the Angel of Death. In addition to his books, Mr. Posner has written for several national publications, including the New York Times, Newsweek, Time, and The New Yorker, and has been a regular contributor to the History Channel, CNN, Fox News, and now Timeless with Julie Hartman. Hello, Gerald. Welcome to the program.
It is great to be with you, Julie. And I must say that the trip that your mother did for you as a gift when you were 17 is pretty remarkable. I mean, it's fantastic. There are not a lot of people that would appreciate it the way that you did, relish that history, and lucky that you went when you did, because some of the things you saw, like Parkland Hospital, are now gone. It was demolished in 2022.
You're kidding.
Taken down, not considered a historical site. So it was really lucky that you were there. Dealey Plaza will always be the same, but little bits of the history disappear as the years march on.
Wow, I am stunned to hear that. I had no idea that Parkland Hospital has been demolished. When I went, as I recall, it was still a hospital. Did they cease all operations? Yeah, no, right, and they transferred to other places. It was 60 years that had been sort of operating, and they demolished the 6 towers, the sky bridges. They prepared it. They're supposed to be building a new and better healthcare facility at some point, but I'm sure that will take some time. And it's not just the JFK assassination. I mean, even on Bobby Kennedy, who was killed at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. The Ambassador Hotel
was demolished a number of years ago. There was an effort to keep it as a historical site, to say this is a bit like, Lincoln Theater, Ford Theater, where Lincoln was shot. We should keep some remnants of it, but, developers and ideas for 30-story office towers and condominiums get in the way of history oftentimes.
Wow. I just can't understand why anyone would want to demolish or remove those historical sites, but that's a topic of conversation perhaps for a subsequent episode, though. Wow, that is shocking. And to your point, I'm all the more appreciative to my lovely mother for taking me when she did. Before we dive into this interview, I want to make something really clear that we were talking about this, Gerald, before the interview, that when it comes to the JFK assassination, people tend to get really invested in a particular point of view. Either that, the Warren Commission report was totally right, it was a lone shooter, there was no conspiracy theory, and that's that. Or the other way around, there were multiple shooters, there was a conspiracy theory. And I just want to make it clear that I don't have an agenda today. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not here to demolish the Warren Commission report or to demolish the thesis of the book that you published 30 years ago. I just really want to get to the truth. And I will acknowledge, though, that through my extensive reading on this subject, especially in preparation for this interview, there are some facts and some things that have come out about this event that do cause me to raise some eyebrows. But I just wanted to make that clear at the beginning. I have no agenda.
Yeah, no, so I think that what's interesting is I find it's almost like a religion after a while for some people. They believe what they believe, and the facts aren't going to dissuade them. I'm most impressed by people who will often get in contact with me and say, by the way, I read Case Closed. I've been a believer that there was a conspiracy, that something was wrong in the case for decades, and I wish I had discovered Case Closed beforehand because I could have saved a lot of money on books advocating conspiracy theories I now no longer believe are true. Those people had an open mind when they went to read Case Closed, but a lot of people don't have an open mind. They have a closed mind about it, or they repeat, Julie, information that's been said so many times that it's thought of as a fact. The idea, that the so-called single bullet, what Oliver Stone called the magic bullet, could never have happened, or that there were witnesses who saw something about the assassination, that they died in mysterious deaths. All of those things demonstrably false. Or even the idea that Oswald worked for the CIA, also, again, just not true. So I think a lot of things are repeated that are wrong. There's another thing. Anybody who's, I approach this as an attorney and as a journalist. So you look at the Kennedy assassination. When I went into it and started to research it, I thought it was probably the mafia. Why? Because of Jack Ruby's murder of Oswald. You look at it, there are a lot of things to be suspicious about in this case of this 24-year-old shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald. Just turned 24, his birthday also in October like yours. And I understand why people say there's just something not right about it. The government is holding on to documents for all these years. It looks like they've got something to hide. So that makes perfect sense. Plus the fact that you have the person arrested as the assassin, shot 2 days later in police custody by a guy who looks like he's coming out of central casting in Hollywood for a mafia figure. No wonder people think there's something wrong. So I get that completely, the why people initially are skeptical. Then the question is, what do you do when you examine the evidence and get into the details?
So right now, on the 60th anniversary, we're at a place where there is the same amount of time that has passed between when you published your book in 1993 and now, and also that is the same amount of time that passed between the assassination and then when you published your book. I think it is fair to say, and of course, cut in if you disagree, that the past 30 years has not increased the credibility or the believability of the Warren Commission report. Is that a fair statement?
I think that the 30 years have worked to the benefit of the Warren Commission report, which has a lot of problems. I'm an equal opportunity castigator. I castigate the Warren Commission for getting the sequence of shooting right, hiding the autopsy, not disclosing the important Zapruder film, the home movie of the assassination, not releasing all the documents, holding consultations in private. So they've done a lot of things that led to that conspiracy speculation. The reason I hesitate on saying, yes, I agree, is the public opinion polls, the Gallup. If you look at Gallup's polls after Oliver Stone did his film JFK in 1990, belief in the lone assassin was at 6%. So that was its all-time low. And since then, in the last 30 years, it's made a slow rise back to about 30% in the poll just done a few months ago. Not because people have read Case Closed by the millions, but because a lot of people were waiting for a deathbed confession, for instance. I know people thought it was a conspiracy and they said, this is going to be like every other major case that's ever broken. Somebody's going to get a guilty conscience right before they die, and they're going to tell us what really happened. Now, 60 years later, the people are near 90, or those who are survived, no deathbed confessions. And then I knew people, Julie, who were saying the law that was passed by Congress in 1992 to release all of the assassination-related files that the government has, they're going to prove. There will be a smoking gun in there, to use a bad word, in terms of an assassin. That will prove a conspiracy. And those files have come out, and they haven't proven that at all. As a matter of fact, if anything, they solidified the view that it was one single shooter shooting at the president that day. So there will never be a consensus on this. I have the very, very, glass half full, wishful title of Case Closed. But I understand this will be a case that will never be closed for a consensus of Americans. There will always be some disagreement, but I've seen that pendulum on the lone assassin go from that 6% up to the 30% range. That may not seem like a lot, but I think that's pretty remarkable in a few decades.
It is. And I think that there may be another dynamic at play here, or some other events that may actually cause some of this speculation surrounding the Warren Commission report. And that is, especially in the 20th century, there seem to, time and time again, have been these situations where the government or the American elite is not being held fully accountable for certain decisions and mistakes that they've made. Just to list a few, and there are so many. The 9/11 Commission did not want, for some reason, to do a deep dive into Saudi Arabian connections to that event. Obviously, there was the unfortunate lead up, to the 2003 invasion of Iraq with the supposed weapons of mass destruction, which were not found. The 2008 financial crisis was a huge shock, and I don't think we really understand or have held people accountable who were behind some of the decision-making, which made that calamity possible. Even seeing someone like Sam Bankman-Fried go up on stage with President Clinton and be on the covers of Fortune and Forbes, and then all of a sudden his scandal is uncovered. Again, that may seem like a minor example compared to others. COVID-19 is another example. How the lab leak theory was first called crazy, and then it turned out to have been true. The through line is that the American elite at times has gotten things really wrong. And then when it turns out that it was exposed that they had gotten it wrong, there seems to be very little accountability. And I think that people view the Warren Commission through that lens of that greater dynamic. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. You hit on some key things. Look, I ended up doing a book called Why America Slept in 2003 about the failures of the CIA and FBI in stopping 9/11. It was a preventable attack. Then I did a book afterwards in 2005 called Secrets of the Kingdom, exposing how we let Saudi Arabia get off with a get out of jail free card, and the dynamics behind that. So I understand how official government panels like the 9/11 Commission or the Warren Commission can do things in which you say, I don't have any trust at all in those types of official panels. In addition, I think after the Kennedy assassination in particular, there was a series not only of the things you mentioned in terms of government failures, but we were lied to about Vietnam, the casualty numbers, the numbers of progress in the war, the light at the end of the tunnel. We saw Watergate take place, later Iran-Contra. We saw instances in which government officials conspired against the best interests of the American people. So the Kennedy assassination in some way serves as the starter for that. And then over time, there were particular things done that make the Kennedy assassination unique, that the home movie of the assassination taken by this Dallas dressmaker, Abraham Zapruder, which the American people had a right to see right away. Where was it? It was locked up by Time Life, who bought rights to the film. They released at first black and white slides and then color slides. Well, the American people didn't see it until 1975 when Geraldo Rivera finally played it for the first time on national television. So there are plenty of things that we don't trust about government or, as you said, the elites. And I think that has fed a general distrust when people hear, oh, by the way, this group of high officials, including a former head of the CIA, on the Warren Commission concluded that it was one lone assassin, people say, that can't be right.
Mm-hmm. What has exacerbated this general distrust, as you brought up earlier, is the fact that not all of the documents have been declassified 60 years later after this event. You mentioned the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, which was passed by Congress under the presidency of George H.W. Bush. That set up an Assassination Records Review Board to release classified records within 25 years. And we know that it's been over 30 years since 1992. And so why is it the case that in 2023, 60 years after this event, there are still hundreds of thousands of documents which have not been made public?
Yeah, so, it's very interesting because it's a disgrace that that's the case. And I've written editorials about this. I've been a proponent of releasing all of the files connected to the assassination for decades. The American people have a right to know what our own government knows about who killed the president. And it is really terrible. It's one of the most shameful parts of this story is that there are some of these files still not available. What is really remarkable is that if you think about this, that when they passed the act in 1992, they gave a 25-year period. What they were doing in Congress was essentially saying, we don't know who will be president in 25 years, but the only person capable of extending the limit will be whoever is president at that time. Sort of like an executive power. You can issue an executive order, the equivalent of it. If the intelligence agencies or the FBI can make a good case as to why they still need to keep some things sealed. Well, when 2017 came around, the president was Donald Trump. And I expected fully that Donald Trump would be the last person who would listen to the CIA or anybody else, in terms of when we talk about the secret government, would listen to them with another excuse as to why they couldn't get these files gone. He would say, absolutely produce them. Instead, he gave them an extension, gave them a second one, which then fell into the Biden administration. And Biden's come in and given them 2 extensions. We're down to 4,000 documents. In some of those documents, we know have never been released in any way at all. They include the tax records of Jack Ruby, of Lee Harvey Oswald, of one of the businesses that Oswald worked at. They also include notes with William Manchester. I know the very first book you read was William Manchester's fantastic Death of a President. His notes with Mrs. Kennedy and with Bobby Kennedy are still sealed there from the American public. The Kennedy family didn't want them out, and they're still in that batch of documents. And then the things that the CIA are fighting for is really to their shame, because when the documents have been released in these court battles recently, what we find out that they are holding still secret are not files related to the assassination, but other embarrassing ventures that they were involved with in the early 60s, like going ahead with the mafia and trying to kill a head of state, not Kennedy, but Castro, or going ahead and trying to pull a coup off in another country, or some of the names that are still assets that they don't want out because those families have now become prominent in Mexican politics or in French politics, and they don't want it released. So I see, again, the CIA primarily not serving the interests of the American public when it comes to the truth about what happened in the case, but trying to protect its own bureaucratic reputation. And that's really unfortunate.
Yes, it is very interesting that Donald Trump, of all people, would not declassify these documents, because the only reason why I see now for these documents to continue to be classified is, as you just said, to protect the institutional reputations of the CIA and the FBI. So do you think there might be something else going on if this president, the most, anti-bureaucracy, anti-3-letter acronym agency individual would not declassify them?
I knew Roger Stone. Roger Stone, I debated the assassination once. Roger has a 180-degree diametrically opposed view of the case, as he thinks Lyndon Johnson was behind it. But he was friends with Donald Trump, and he would tell me consistently, he said, that Trump believes there's a conspiracy there. I have no reason to doubt that. So I would think that President Trump would be the one who would want the files released just to see what's there himself. And it was always remarkable to me that the CIA was still able to argue means and methods and sources of gathering information. One of the wrinkles on the JFK Assassination Act is that when it was passed by Congress, it does not allow any redactions where the government releases a file. And many of your viewers will have seen a government file that looks like a joke. It has so many blacked out marks on one page, you can't even read anything. Those are all redactions that they make to hide information that's sensitive or still private. Under the JFK Act, There can be no redactions. So a file has to be released in its entirety. Otherwise, we would be getting some of these files with a name redacted out that the CIA said is still alive after all these years, now in their mid or late 80s. It helped us on intelligence in Mexico City, let's say back in the 60s. That's unfortunate. I wish there was an exception to the law that would say you can release these files in their entirety, just redact one part. And also amazing to me that after all these years, we do not have the tax files of Oswald, Ruby, or the businesses. The government was able to subpoena successfully the tax files of Donald Trump. Democratic members of the Judiciary Committee were able to get those. So you can get the tax files of a former president if you go ahead and get them from Congress. But we, the American people, can't have the tax files of Oswald and Ruby. That's preposterous.
How can you be confident in your thesis corroborating the Warren Commission report's findings, if in fact there are still thousands of documents which have not been released about this event?
The reason I'm confident we're not going to get a document that changes the case from the documents there is, here's my view of it. Let's say that Oliver Stone is close to the truth, that it's a vast government conspiracy, that the CIA and the mafia were involved in killing JFK back in 1963 because they were afraid he was going to pull us out of Vietnam, according to them, or destroy the CIA, whatever the reason. They've decided to kill the president. And they pull it off, Julie, and essentially it's the perfect crime, meaning that although a lot of people are suspicious, no one's ever been charged with it. They've never figured out who another shooter would be other than Oswald. It fools people like me who are legitimate investigators who come in and spend a few years looking at the case, and then I buy the fake story that is set down. So here they pulled off this crime. It really is, in terms of government efficiency, one of the few instances in which they operate at supreme efficiency as opposed to bungling it as they often do. And are we to believe that after all of this, they pulled off this crime, but they made one mistake? Somebody inside the conspiracy made the mistake of sending the key documents, the smoking gun documents that show what really happened, to the National Archives after they asked for them in 1992 when the law was passed for the JFK Act. They took the files that still exist that show the conspiracy, sent it over there, and then when they realized that they've sent the files there, all they're doing is fighting to keep them closed. Nobody breaks back in, nobody steals into the National Archives, takes the documents back out, destroys them. My point is that if this was the vast government conspiracy that some people believe it is, I assure you the last place we would find the files that would disclose that would be sitting at the National Archives, sent over there in the early 1990s after Congress had passed an act. They would have either been long ago destroyed or they'd be sitting someplace else where we don't get them.
I would like you to please respond to some of the specifics that we have learned about in the 30 years since your book has been published and now. And these are things that were, as I just said, either not known about, or they're things that I think were not dealt with as straightforwardly or as completely as they should have been in the Warren Commission report. It doesn't, at least to me, paint a very good picture of the process of the Commission report. First, am I correct that the Warren Commission report mixed up the order of the first two shots by Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, at least according to me, when I came out with Case Closed, I relied upon ballistics testing that had been done the year earlier by a group called Failure Analysis, which does courtroom work on ballistics and presents them for the defense and for the prosecution. They had asked a question about the JFK assassination. What can be done in terms of ballistics today, meaning 1992, a year before the 30th anniversary, that couldn't be done by the FBI back in 1964? And it turned out, Julie, not surprisingly, that the answer was quite a bit. The Warren Commission had to guess at the single bullet. They weren't quite sure how one bullet had wounded two men. They weren't sure how that happened. The FBI could never figure out how that bullet emerged in very good condition. The Warren Commission also thought that the first shot had hit the president and the governor. The last shot we see on the film is the headshot. It's a very graphic shot. So it gives the shooter about 5.5 seconds. That was sort of done by marksmen afterwards who redid it for the FBI, and also by CBS, which did a reconstruction a few years later. But it's a tight shooting sequence. In fact, it's clear now that the overwhelming evidence, and most of the people who look at the forensics agree, that the first shot actually misses. And the reason for that is you don't have any sound on the Zapruder film, so you can't hear it. But you can see the people on the film reacting to that first shot in line with what their testimony was back in 1963. A little girl running along the street, Rosemary Willis, in a red skirt, turns around and looks back up over the right, back toward the book depository. Why? Because she said she had heard a sound, a loud sound that sounded like a firecracker. All of the Secret Service agents start in frames 160, 165. That's important because frames mean frames of the Zapruder film. That's our time clock for the assassination, 18 frames to a second. They're looking over a third of a second. Same thing they said to the FBI and the Warren Commission early on. They look back and to the right. They're looking up toward the direction of where they heard a loud noise. Some knew that it sounded like a rifle shot. They're reacting to that shot. That shot misses. It's deflected either by a tree or the lamppost goes out 500 feet from the depository, hits a curbstone, and wounds a bystander, James Tague, on the cheek. And then the shooter, I think say Oswald, but the shooter has 3.5 seconds to recock the bolt on this World War II vintage military rifle that fires a 165 grain fully jacketed bullet. It's a good killing machine. He has to then re-aim, shoot again, and that second shot is not fatal. Second shot, JFK, if that was the last shot, would have survived. That's the shot that hits the president and then goes on to hit the governor. And there are new ballistics on understanding how that happened. And then the shooter has a full 5 seconds, about 5.5 seconds, the longest time to recock the bolt again, aim back through the scope. The scope is a cheap 4-power scope, but the president at the moment of the headshot is 100 yards away. It looks like he's 25 yards away in that scope. And the motorcade, critically, and you can see this when you watch the Zapruder film, has slowed up. It turns the corner. It's doing about 10 to 11 miles an hour. The driver of the motorcade of the car looks back toward the president at the moment of the headshot. He's slowed the car up to about 5 miles an hour. He's not taking any evasive action. And the president is lulled a little bit to the left in a back brace. We forget about that. JFK was wearing a back brace that day, so he doesn't fall over. The assassin gets the straight-on shot, and he still almost misses. And it hits him in the high right rear of the head and blows out the front of the head. 1.5 inches higher, Kennedy lives and is a failed assassination. We now know with Ronald Reagan that if Hinckley's bullet had been over 1.25 inches, Reagan would be dead. The difference on these assassinations being successful or not sometimes is literally that little of a distance.
Before we continue, I want to tell you about MyPillow. I use many MyPillow products, including the My Slippers, which I wear to work every day, the Giza Dream bed sheets, the MyPillow, the My Towels, and even more. And you can get many of those products at a discount if you use the promo code Hartman, which is my last name spelled Hartman. For a limited time, you'll get 60% off of the Giza Dream sheets that comes with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. You'll get a set for as low as $39.99. And for a limited time, with any purchase, you'll receive Mike's softcover book free with the promo code Hartman. Just go to mypillow.com and click on the radio listener square and use the promo code Hartman, or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman. Along with this offer, you'll get deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow mattress topper, the aforementioned MyPillow towel sets, and more. So the Warren Commission got the order wrong, though, of those first two shots?
Absolutely. There's no doubt in terms of those of us who just look at the current ballistics and the film that is the case. And even the House Select Committee, which re-examined the case in the late 70s, thought that. There are still people that believe the Warren Commission got it right. So I just did an interview the other day in which I interviewed Clint Hill, who's the Secret Service agent who went ahead and jumped on the back of the cars that was zooming out of Dealey Plaza. Now, he's in the middle of the trauma. He's in the middle of hearing the shots. So he has to recall very clearly what he thinks he heard. He believes that the first shot hit. That's his recollection of it. But the film, thank goodness we have the Zapruder film. Without the Zapruder film, all you would be relying on are ear witnesses and eyewitnesses, both of which I know are not that reliable. And even though the majority of ear witnesses said they heard 3 shots and 3 shots only, and they heard it from behind the area of the president, that's not conclusive. They could be wrong. Dealey Plaza is like a bit of an echo chamber. So you have to go for what I call the best evidence. The best evidence for where the wounds are, who hit the president that day, is looking at the autopsy, x-rays, and photos. The only shooter at Dealey Plaza who struck anybody was shooting from behind the president in the general vicinity of where Oswald was last left by his co-workers half an hour before the shooting began. Now, if you conclude that there were 3 shots, the first shot missed, the second 2 shots hit at frames 224, and then again at frames 313. They're fired from the general vicinity of the Texas School Book Depository. That still doesn't tell you who the shooter is. You then have to go ahead and examine that, see the eyewitness statements and what that's about. And even if you then determine that's Oswald, that doesn't tell you if Oswald's doing it for himself or for a group of conspirators. It doesn't tell you if there were other shooters at Dealey Plaza who might have been ready to fire but didn't fire that day. So people always assume that if you come out of Dealey Plaza having looked at the ballistics evidence and you conclude only shots from behind the president and they all came from Oswald's gun to the exclusion of any other gun in the world, the case is solved. It's not at all. The difficult work is still to tackle if there was a conspiracy involved.
Furthering speculation of a conspiracy is this anecdote from Dr. Humes, who was one of the pathologists at the autopsy of President Kennedy at Parkland Hospital. And he has stated on the record that there were not enough fragments out of what they call the magic bullet. That is the bullet that went through the president into Governor Connolly, through the ribs, into the right wrist, and into the thigh. Dr. Humes maintains that there are not enough fragments out of that magic bullet to account for the fragments that were found in Connolly's thigh and wrist. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so that's why I am glad that Dr. Humes is not a ballistics expert. He sticks to what he does best, which is to do medical work and autopsies. And that's why he's not providing that type of information when called before a group to give an official opinion. Matter of fact, the bullet we now know was found by likely a Secret Service agent who's given a new account, Paul Landis, who'll tell the story of how he found it in the car and then deposited it on a stretcher at Dealey Plaza. I've examined that bullet. In person, you have to get a special permission to go ahead and do it. You can't get near it. People are wearing gloves when they show it to you. That bullet, by the way, is described often by conspiracy theorists as nearly pristine. That's Julie like saying you're nearly pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. It's either pristine or it's not. It's not pristine. It's flattened down on one side. And what Humes couldn't understand, maybe because it's not his specialty, what I couldn't understand until 92 and the new ballistics tests were done, and now it's been done by NOVA and by PBS, is how that bullet slows up as it goes through the two men. So the FBI used to think, oh, it's fired and it's 2,000 feet a second. So when it's hitting the bones in Connolly, that's the first time it hits bones, at his rib and later at his wrist, that bullet should be have larger fragments off of it and be in much worse condition. Now, ballistics experts say it was fired at 2,000 feet a second. It hit Kennedy in his high neck throat area about 15 to 1,600 feet a second, exits through his throat right here in the front without hitting any bone. It's tumbling when it goes into Connolly. We know that because the entrance wound on Connolly's right shoulder is literally 1.25 inches long, which is the size of the bullet. It's going sideways. It hits the rib sideways. That's what flattens down a little bit. And by the time it hits the wrist, which is a straight line as Connolly's turned in this direction, it's going about 900 feet a second. That's enough to break the bone, not enough to do damage to the bullet. And you would say, Gerald, that's a great theory, but that how do I know that's true? Because those people who first came up with this idea of how the bullet slows then took cadavers the size and weight of the governor and the president, and they did ballistics tests repeating the single bullet from the same distance. And guess what? You can repeat it all day long. I have an image in my book in Case Closed of the original bullet that was found at Parkland Hospital and a recreation that was done in 1992. And they're essentially the same, going through the same two people in the same way. So what Humes couldn't understand makes sense. The FBI couldn't understand it, but they're wrong.
T. Jeremy Gunn, who is the head of the Presidential Assassination Records Bureau, which was created because of that congressional act passed in 1992, he in 1997 interviewed a woman named Sandra Spencer, who was a warrant officer in the Navy. And her job, as you probably know, on November 22nd, 1963, was processing all White House photographs, developing the film for those photographs. And she ended up processing many of the photographs / all of the photographs of President Kennedy's autopsy. And in that 1997 interview, Mr. Gunn showed her photos, the official photos from the National Archives of President Kennedy's autopsy. And she responded that she was close to certain that those official photographs of the autopsy were not the same photographs that she processed that day 25 years earlier. Now, of course, 25 years had passed, so it's difficult to remember exactly.
Over 30 years, 34 years had passed.
That's right. That's why I was not a math major. I was a history major.
Yeah. So think about this, though. I mean, this is really remarkable. These are the Johnny and Jane come latelys to the case that have, we've had over 30 people confess to being the second assassin, the so-called grassy knoll assassin. So people come out of the woodwork. People's testimony of that day changed. And I know one thing, that I've studied memory in part for doing this, and I know it also as a lawyer. If you have an event that takes place, people have different recollections of what they think they know, and then their memory changes over time. On this case in particular, like on the Murrah building bombing in 1995 and on the Challenger discovery that blew up and on 9/11, people have what memory experts call flashbulb memories, which mean it's just like a flashbulb goes off. It embarks on your brain where you were, who told you, what you were thinking, and what you saw that day. And then over time, Julie, you read things, you watch documentaries, you read books, you read articles, and those memories implant themselves and become as real to those people as their original memories. And that, again, not just a theory, but the University of Wisconsin took a couple of hundred kids after the Challenger discovery, and they asked them, where were you, who told you, and what time? Went back to them a couple of years later. It's not surprising that on one or more of the answers, they had a different answer. But what was really fascinating is that about 40%, when shown their original answer from a couple of years prior, said, oh, I'm sure what I told you originally is wrong, because I know what I'm telling you now is right. So people can say it and pass a lie detector test. In her case, she's looking at photographs 34 years after the fact. It's taken place in 1997, after the assassination. And supposed to remember at that point whether the photograph that she has seen is the photograph that was actually taken at the time that she processed. That is like, winning mega lottery if you think that you're going to rely on that at all. But the people who want to rely on that will do it. What won't they do, Julie? They won't look at the test that was done by the House Select Committee from 1975 to 1978 to see if there was any evidence of fakery on any of the autopsy photos or on any of the x-rays, and concluded there wasn't at all. Who went through the original rolls process and the number that were actually produced. So you do get testimony like that. The problem is that people don't question it the way they would question anything else. They latch onto it because it gives them an answer that they want to believe in, even if it's fake history.
Your point is well taken on memory, especially 34. Thank you for correcting my math. Years after the photographs were processed. I just want to quickly, though, read to you some of the things that she said, or the evidence that she cited as far as the differences. The first two pertain to her memory, but the third reason doesn't. First, she said that she thought that the photos, the official photos that Mr. Gunn showed her, were more brightly lighted than the ones that she remembers. She also commented on the wounds on the president, especially the head wound. She said that it looked a lot bigger than the ones that she recollected. She also said that his eyes were opened in these new photos, and she remembers the president's eyes being closed. And again, your point is well taken as far as how memories can change. But then she said she actually brought with her to this 1997 interview some photographs that she had processed a few days earlier than November 22nd, 1963. And she looked at the paper markings of those photographs that she processed earlier, and she said that she would have used the same paper to process the Kennedy autopsy photos, and the paper markings on the official autopsy photos were not the same as the paper markings that was the same paper that she would have used to process those photos. How do you respond to that?
Well, I just think it's just, it's like with a dream and a catch, you have a theory about something. So again, we're relying on her 34 years later saying, I'm sure what I did before 11/22, the same paper that I used afterwards. We think so? Do you think that when she was processing the photographs of Kennedy's from the autopsy, it was a traumatic event for her? I would say absolutely. Unless she was made of steel and ice, it had to be one of the most traumatic things she ever processed, which makes her recall that even less reliable than would be in almost any other situation. So again, if she could produce something as a fact, that would be interesting. But let's assume for a second she's telling the truth. 34 years she kept quiet. She never said anything about it. Nobody decided to knock her off because she could blow up the entire conspiracy. She comes out, she gives this interview to Gwynn in 1997. And now the conspiracy has been unmasked for faking the autopsy pictures. For what purpose? All of the ballistics evidence and all of the evidence is that the president was shot from behind. Are they hiding the evidence it was really shot from a different direction? Are they trying to frame somebody else? Are they trying to change the nature of a wound? And then you can go down the rabbit hole and figure out what it means. But even if her testimony was accurate, the point is, to what effect?
We don't have that much time left, so forgive me if I go rapid fire. Probably not the best term to use when talking about this day, but if I go rapid fire with my questions. Again, this is just more evidence that I've read. I've compiled new interviews that have come out in the 30 years since your book was published and now. David Slauson was a young lawyer. He worked alongside another young lawyer as staffers on the Warren Commission in charge of finding out if there was any foreign involvement in the assassination. And of course, the Warren Commission concluded that there was not. Mr. Slauson is on the record as saying that he believes that he and his fellow lawyer were seriously misled and lied to by members of the Warren Commission. And he is specifically incensed at the CIA and at Robert F. Kennedy Sr. He has, again, been very forthcoming about how he does not think that the members of the Warren Commission are credible and that the report itself lacks credibility. Can you please comment on that?
Yeah, he's absolutely right. And as a matter of fact, I castigate the Warren Commission and the CIA for a big cover-up. The CIA and the FBI had a cover-up after the assassination.
What was it?
When people first pick up evidence of that, they think it's cover-up of a murder. The FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, the vaunted FBI, was petrified. They had an open file on Oswald. Agents were interviewing him in Dallas. They were afraid that somebody would point a finger at them and said, hey, you, the FBI, you didn't know this guy was dangerous enough to possibly shoot at the president? He had shot at a retired Army general a few months earlier and tried to kill him, and he had a job on the motorcade route. So Hoover backed away. They destroyed a note that had been left by Oswald at the Dallas office. Disgraceful. And the CIA was petrified because of Bobby Kennedy, that their plan to kill a head of state, Castro, with the mafia would be unmasked. So they lied to the Warren Commission. They kept it a secret. Bobby didn't want it out. Alan Dulles, who was on the Warren Commission, made sure that it didn't get to the commission. And as a result, the commission looked terrible years later when that became public knowledge, because it was possible. It raised the legitimate possibility that Castro had decided, they're trying to kill me. I'm going to kill them first so that I can survive. Strictly a matter of survival, and that Cuba was behind the assassination. All of the staffers should have known that and looked into it. In the end, I don't believe there's any evidence for that, but it's one of the great shortcomings of the investigation and the Warren Commission. So
you maintain that they were trying to protect their own reputations and the institutional credibility, having missed or not properly surveilled Lee Harvey Oswald or followed up on that threat.
That was on the FBI end. On the Castro end, remember, the CIA was still trying to kill Castro. There was never another attempt after the Kennedy assassination, but they still had that as an active plot. They were trying to kill a head of state only 90 miles away from the U.S. They had failed. Remember, the very same group of people, the CIA and the mafia, thought of by many people to be the ones behind the Kennedy assassination and have pulled off this near-perfect crime. They failed 9 times to even wound Castro. They really want to get him out. The CIA wants no communist government 90 miles off of Florida, and the mob wants their casinos back so they can make money again. Even with all that incentive, they are more like the Keystone Cops than they are the efficient James Bonds of the world.
Mm-hmm. And we do know that the FBI and CIA, in advance of November 22nd, they did know who Lee Harvey Oswald was. You talked about how he was alleged to have tried to kill Edmund Walker in March of 1963. He defected to the Soviet Union. That obviously makes him incredibly suspicious. He was arrested in New Orleans in August of 1963 for handing out pro-Castro leaflets. He went to Mexico City in 1963 and went to the Soviet and Cuban embassy, where he apparently was at a social event and yelled out, "I'm going to kill Kennedy." So the point is, this guy was pretty suspicious, and he was somewhat on the radar of the FBI and the CIA, but clearly they did not follow up with that and track him down, especially knowing that he worked in the Texas School Book Depository and that Kennedy would be en route nearby there. So you're saying they were trying to protect themselves.
Well, he gets the job a couple of weeks after he returns to Dallas in the middle of October. They set the motorcade route after that. Right. But here's the key. You're absolutely right. The CIA, in 9/11, Very quickly, the CIA followed two terrorists from Saudi Arabia to a terror summit in Malaysia in December of 1999. They didn't know their names, but they had Malaysian intelligence do video of them. They then watched those two terrorists move into California, where they registered under their real names, got driver's license in their real names. The CIA never told anyone else. They never told the FBI. They never told Homeland Security. No one was told. Those two end up as two of the 19 hijackers on 9/11. One of them, Al-Madar, is actually flying one of the planes. If the CIA had shared that information with others, we might have been able to stop 9/11. The same with the Kennedy assassination. If you said to me, what do you think the documents are that are still sealed that might come out of the National Archives that could be explosive? For me, it's not about disclosing a conspiracy in the case. It is showing possibly the CIA knew more about how dangerous Oswald was, that he might have made a threat that even included one against the president when he was in Mexico City trying to get a visa to go to Havana just a month and a half before the assassination. And when he returned to Dallas, not being able to go to Havana, the CIA did not tell the FBI. They didn't tell anyone else. And once the assassination happened, they buried Oswald far down in the backlogs of their files because they didn't want that shame to be on top of them. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
The Warren Commission maintains that Jack Ruby had no significant connections to organized crime, which is ridiculous because, as you know, he ran strip clubs in Dallas, which were basically fronts or hubs for organized crime. Also, Charles Brandt, in the book I Heard You Paint Houses, claims that Jack Ruby was sent to Cuba to try to bribe them to get someone out of jail. He was sent by organized crime. Why in the world would the Warren Commission deny Jack Ruby's obvious connections to organized crime?
Well, because actually the Warren Commission was right on that, believe it or not. I know that will surprise a lot of people. Yeah, they didn't do an adequate investigation because, again, the FBI hid something from them. The information that settles whether Ruby, in fact, had ties didn't come out until the mid-1970s when the FBI was being excoriated for its MK Ultra and other illegal programs. It turns out that the FBI had an illegal wiretap in the headquarters of the Chicago Mafia. Ruby was from Chicago. Sam Giancana, one of the chief mafia bosses. As a matter of fact, he had an affair with somebody that Jack Kennedy later had an affair with, Judith Exner. They had put in this illegal wiretap. The Chicago mob were virgins in terms of electronic surveillance. They didn't even know that the FBI knew where their headquarters was. There are moments on this, and it goes on for several years after the assassination, in which the mobsters say, oh, by the way, do you think there's any chance the feds could know about this and have this place bugged? The FBI would then break back into the headquarters, take the wire tap material out, and they would have it swept, the mafia would, and then the FBI would go back in after it had been swept and put it back in. The reason I say that we know Ruby had no connection, we listened to the conversations, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of these conversations of the Chicago gangland, including Giancana at the highest levels, before and after the assassination. And when Kennedy gets killed, they're all interested in how did it happen, who did it. And when Ruby kills Oswald on Sunday, you can hear the tapes, you can go down the transcripts. Who is he? What happened with this guy? You're kidding. You ever hear of him? No, not me. So we're listening to the mafia bosses that would have sent him down to Dallas in the first place. Did Ruby want to be part of the mafia? Absolutely. Was he a mafia wannabe boy? Clearly. He was a tough guy who had hoped that he could finally get inside. Nobody paid attention to him and no one knew him. We have those sound recordings, but they were illegal. They were never provided to the Warren Commission, and we didn't know them until the mid-70s.
Before we wrap up with some general takeaways and thoughts, I came across this perhaps minor fact, but it's one of those things which, among the other pieces of information I presented to you, just causes me to raise some eyebrows. The thing I find about this assassination is that no single thing in isolation is devastating, particularly or particularly damning. But then there are kind of all of these separate facts which seem to be a little bit bizarre, and they don't point in a good direction. Again, I'm saying this as someone who doesn't have an agenda, just really someone who's done a lot of reading and come across just weird facts. One of them is that there was a biographer of the Bush family in the early 2000s, and he interviewed President George H.W. Bush and just kind of offhandedly asked him, where were you on November 22nd, 1963? And President Bush, the father, answered, I don't remember. Now, that is a truly bizarre answer, considering that he was old enough at that time to have been aware that he wasn't a baby, as I was on 9/11. I don't remember 9/11. I was 2 years old, but he was old enough to have a memory of it. And everyone remembers, if they were cognizant, where they were on November 22nd, 1963. And then this biographer found evidence that the president was actually in Dallas that day. What do you make of that?
So what does that mean? Is it the president had dementia when he gave the answer to that? Or is the president hiding the fact that he was really on the grassy knoll doing the shooting? People look at isolated facts and then they think it means something for the case. I also have no agenda other than seeking what the truth is. I hope to find, when I was doing the original investigation on this, a conspiracy, so that I could actually come up with the conclusive piece of evidence that said, here's a conspiracy behind the case, because it would be a far bigger story than coming back and saying, by the way, I think Oswald did it, but the Warren Commission got a lot of things wrong. And when you say, Julie, I think that people get confused. They see all these different things out there that think that's odd and that's odd and that's odd. But then they don't, first of all, they don't look into them. And if they did, they'd find that there's an answer for just about every one of them. And in addition, what does it mean then in terms of a conspiracy? How does that fit into a story? So the problem is, you've got to convince me in terms of saying, here's how this works, as opposed to just being anomalies. Anomalies happen in every case. And anybody, by the way, who is waiting to be 100% satisfied on what happened on the Kennedy assassination, you might as well give up on it, because it's never going to happen. All you can do is look at the evidence, weigh the credibility of the best evidence, and come to a conclusion as a historian and an investigator. And that's what I did.
In closing, since the book has come out, is there anything that you've learned that has surprised you? And if you were rewriting the book today, what would you change, if anything?
I think I'd be harder on the CIA for still holding on to files all these years later, but there hasn't been any disclosure or anything that's come different. The one thing is, I've just done an update for the 60th anniversary, first time in 20 years, and I addressed the claims of a Secret Service agent, Paul Landis, and I think that he, in fact, found a single bullet that is Commission Exhibit 399, the so-called single bullet, deposited on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital. We now know how it got there. He solved one of the little footnote mysteries of the case.
One of my takeaways from this interview is that what is really unfortunate is that it seems that perhaps the Warren Commission report's conclusions were sound, but their process was so full of faults and so self-serving in many ways that some people, because they see the process is corrupt, they think the conclusions are somehow wrong. And again, just 60 years later, that's very unfortunate that is the way that this is aged. But thank you so much for all of the work that you do. Your extraordinarily, as I said, detailed analysis of all of this. And I so appreciate your time coming on to the show today. I know you're probably talking a lot about this today.
No, as a matter of fact, I'm just about to talk to somebody at 10:30 in England. We're just about to make that connection. So
Go
even
ahead.
across the pond, they are still interested in what happened to Kennedy 60 years later. Thank you, Julie, so much. It was a treat to join you.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you so much for joining me. I'll see you soon.